So let's go back, way back. Because the story of how humans learned to talk across distance is a lot stranger and a lot more impressive than most people realize. Start with sound itself, because it turns out drums aren't just for music. Across huge parts of West Africa, communities developed what's genuinely called talking drums, instruments specifically designed to mimic the rhythm and tone patterns of spoken language closely enough that a trained listener several villages away could actually understand entire coded phrases, not just a simple alert. A skilled drummer could relay news, warnings, even fairly detailed messages, hilltop to hilltop, covering remarkable distances in a fraction of the time it would take a runner to physically carry the same information. Here's the detail that genuinely surprises people. This wasn't a crude signal system with a handful of basic meanings. Some talking drum traditions were sophisticated enough to essentially transmit actual language, tonal patterns mapped closely enough to specific words and phrases that message chains could relay genuinely complex information across dozens of miles in remarkably little time. Now let's head to a completely different environment, because Native American communities across the plains developed their own elegant solution using something everyone already had access to: fire. By carefully controlling a fire with a wet blanket, releasing short or long bursts of smoke in specific patterns, a scout on a hilltop could send a coded message visible for miles across open terrain. A distant village or party, watching that specific pattern of puffs against the sky, could read genuinely specific meaning into it. Danger approaching, safe to proceed, gather here. Simple, visible from an enormous distance, and remarkably effective across the wide open landscapes where this method developed. Now here's where things get genuinely demanding, because before any of these signal-based systems, and alongside them for centuries afterward, the most reliable way to move a detailed message any real distance was simply a human being, running. Ancient Persia built an extensive network of relay stations along its royal road, positioned at intervals specifically calculated so a fresh messenger, or a fresh horse, was always ready to take over immediately. According to ancient accounts, the Greek historian Herodotus described this relay system with genuine admiration, noting that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness stopped these couriers from completing their route, a phrase so memorable it still echoed, more than 2,000 years later, in a completely different country's postal service motto. And it wasn't just Persia. The ancient Inca, without a written language in the traditional sense, built an equally impressive relay system across the Andes Mountains, using runners called chasquis who sprinted along a genuinely enormous network of mountain trails, carrying messages recorded through an intricate system of knotted cords called quipu, capable of encoding numerical information, and, according to many researchers, likely narrative information as well, all communicated purely through the pattern, color, and placement of individual knots. Think about the physical demand of that job for a second. These weren't casual walks. Relay runners across multiple ancient civilizations were selected specifically for exceptional endurance, sometimes covering genuinely staggering distances at a dead sprint before handing off to the next runner waiting down the trail, an entire relay network functioning essentially as a human-powered information highway, centuries before anyone had ever imagined an electrical wire. Now let's talk about an animal that turned out to be genuinely perfect for this exact job: the pigeon. Homing pigeons possess a remarkable, still not entirely understood natural ability to navigate back to their home loft across enormous distances, and humans figured out remarkably early that a small message capsule attached to a pigeon's leg could cross terrain and cover distance considerably faster and more reliably than a human messenger in plenty of situations. Here's the twist that surprises a lot of people. Carrier pigeons weren't just an ancient curiosity. They remained a genuinely important, actively used communication tool well into the 20th century, including extensive military use during both world wars, when a reliable pigeon could carry critical battlefield information across enemy lines in situations where radio signals could be intercepted or simply weren't available at all. Some particularly famous pigeons are credited with saving genuinely significant numbers of soldiers by successfully delivering urgent messages under dangerous conditions. Now, here's a turning point that genuinely changes the entire pace of this story, because mechanical, rather than purely biological or human-powered, long-distance signaling eventually arrived, and it was faster than anything that came before it by an enormous margin. In the late 1700s, engineers in France developed a system called the optical telegraph, essentially a network of tall towers, each equipped with movable mechanical arms arranged in specific positions to represent different letters and common phrases, all according to a shared codebook. An operator at one tower would read the arm position of the next tower down the line through a telescope, then immediately replicate that exact position on their own tower, relaying a message across an entire chain of stations stretching, in some networks, hundreds of miles. Picture the genuine speed of that for a moment. A message that would have taken a horse-mounted courier several days to physically carry across that same distance could now cross an entire chain of Semaphore towers in a matter of hours, sometimes less, an absolutely revolutionary leap in communication speed for anyone alive to witness it. The obvious catch, of course, was that it only worked in clear daylight. Fog, darkness, or heavy rain could halt an entire network's communication for hours, sometimes days, at a time. Then, in the 1800s, an entirely new technology made even that mechanical relay system look slow, the electric telegraph. By sending controlled electrical pulses down a wire, encoded into patterns of short and long signals, a message could travel the entire length of that wire essentially instantaneously, regardless of weather, daylight, or physical distance, limited only by how far the wire itself actually stretched. Here's the detail that genuinely stunned people at the time. A message that once took days or weeks to physically carry across a country could now arrive in the time it took a trained operator to tap it out and another to translate the incoming clicks back into words. Crowds would genuinely gather outside telegraph offices in major cities, waiting anxiously for important news, election results, stock prices, word from a distant battlefield, updates that would have been unimaginable to receive that quickly just a single generation earlier. And then, engineers pushed that same basic idea, somewhere genuinely audacious, underneath an entire ocean. Laying a telegraph cable across the floor of the Atlantic took multiple attempts, enormous expense, and genuinely serious engineering risk, with early cables repeatedly failing after only days or weeks of use. But once a reliable transatlantic cable finally succeeded, a message that once took a ship several weeks to physically carry across the ocean could now cross that exact same distance in minutes, an achievement so significant it was genuinely front-page news around the entire world. Meanwhile, ordinary written mail had its own dramatic evolution happening in parallel. In the American West, a short-lived but genuinely legendary mail service used a relay of young riders on fast horses, swapping mounts at stations positioned roughly 10 miles apart, to carry mail across the entire continent in a fraction of the time a stagecoach would have required. It only operated for about 18 months before the transcontinental telegraph made it instantly obsolete, but it left behind an outsized legacy for its remarkably brief existence, largely because the sheer physical daring of the job captured public imagination in a way a wire simply couldn't. Now, finally, we arrive at the invention that genuinely closes the loop on this entire story, the telephone, allowing an actual human voice, rather than coded pulses or symbols, to travel instantly across a wire for the very first time. Early telephone networks required manual switchboard operators to physically connect each individual call by plugging cords into the correct socket, a genuinely labor-intensive process that remained standard for decades before automated switching eventually took over. Picture a family in the early 20s.